Liverpool might just be the real deal, but are Manchester City under Pep Guardiola finished? We're going to get into all of that on this bonus edition of the Chronicles of a Gooner pod. Thank you for joining me. Happy Sunday. Hope you're all well. Let's get into it. Okay, how are we doing? Good to see so many of you with us for this bonus episode of the podcast, coming to you live on a Sunday night. Not something that we normally do, but I figured this was such a huge game that it was worth covering through an Arsenal lens, of course. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm doing it from a completely neutral standpoint. I'm an Arsenal fan, and I would have preferred Manchester City to have won the game today, just because Liverpool are that bit further ahead of us. And obviously, the way they've been going, they've looked pretty formidable. And it's starting to become a concern. It's starting to become a worry. They're well into that run of games now that everybody said they would come unstuck in. You know, people were looking at them at the start of the season and they kept saying, well, yeah, but who have they played? And as sort of time's gone on and their fixture list has become increasingly difficult, they've still managed to pass most of those tests, and in some cases with flying colours. And that worries me now. It does. Look, we're going to talk a lot about Liverpool on this episode. We're going to give them their flowers because, my word, do they deserve them. I thought they were outstanding throughout this game against Manchester City. And I think that they were fully deserving of all 3 points. And I think you've got to give Arne Slot immense praise and credit for the job that he's done so far. Taking over from somebody like Jurgen Klopp is never easy. And as I've said on many other shows and podcasts and sort of more general football conversations, I think that the thing that you have to give Arne Slot a lot of praise for is that he's come in and he's recognized what it is that Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool were very good at. And whilst he's gone to implement his own style and put his own stamp on things, he's made sure that he keeps a lot of the same principles that Jurgen Klopp instilled over the years. Why? Because those are principles that those players, the majority of which were signed under Jurgen Klopp, were brought up to play. Right? Those players that are in that Liverpool squad were signed to play the Jurgen Klopp way. And in some cases, the players that were brought through, they were brought up to play the Jurgen Klopp way. So if you completely change things, if you dramatically try and reinvent the wheel, you're going to end up with a transitional period whereby your level can drop and you can find yourselves off the pace. Arne Slot's not gone in there all guns blazing and said, we are going to play my way and we're going to abandon everything that happened before. There are some similarities to the way that he and Jurgen Klopp like football to be played, but there are some differences too. And I think whilst he's gone about implementing his philosophy, style, ideas, he's made sure that the change hasn't been too drastic. It's been subtle, but really, really effective tweaks, and that's working for them brilliantly. It really, really is. And so when I look at the league table now, off the back of that result, Arsenal, of course, closed the gap on Liverpool to 6 points, but we're now 9 behind them again. We're in second on 25 points. We've got a goal difference of plus 12, same as Chelsea. So, you know, us and Chelsea are the closest right now to Liverpool. Manchester City are down in 5th now, and they are 11 points behind Arne Slot's side. Is it curtains for them as far as the title race goes? Difficult to say that, I think, at this stage of the season, at the beginning of December. But, you know, there does need to be a conversation about whether or not this iteration of Manchester City under Pep Guardiola is finished. And I hate to say that. And I don't want to sort of jump the gun, because for years and years and years, we've watched Manchester City go through difficult periods and then come out on the other side of Christmas and go on these formidable, unbelievable, incredible runs and end up taking the title. So you'd be silly to completely write them off. You'd be silly to rule them out. But 11 points is a big old gap, and it just feels different this time. I believe that we will be the closest challengers to Arne Slot's Liverpool. I believe that between now and the end of January, we will make up some points on them. But my God, they're looking good at the moment. And you have to be fair and you have to admit that. You know, I know a lot of people, if Arne Slot was to go on and win the league with Liverpool, would be up in arms about it. They would say, hold on a minute. Mikel Arteta's had all these seasons at Arsenal. He spent all of this money. Arne Slot spent pretty much nothing. And he's going to walk in and win the Premier League and take the title away from Arsenal, from under Mikel Arteta's nose, in the year that was supposed to be Arsenal's year. If that was to happen, I can imagine the reaction would be quite big, quite toxic. And although I don't think it's as cut and dry and as black and white as that, because as I've said before on this podcast, I think when you look at that Liverpool side, say what you want about what happened last season under Jurgen Klopp, they've got Virgil van Dijk in there who's been there, done it. They've got Mo Salah in there who's been there, done it. They've got a World Cup winner in the centre of their midfield. They've got players all over the park. Robertson at left back, Alisson in goal. I know he's not playing right now, but they've got that experience of having won this Premier League before. They've got the experience of having won the Champions League, and they've got the experience of winning tons and tons of trophies under Jurgen Klopp. So it's not quite as black and white as Arne Slot just leapfrogged above Mikel Arteta, if that's the way this ends up going. Trent Alexander-Arnold's another one just mentioned in the chat. But yeah, I think that it would be quite the surprise, actually, because this was a season that Liverpool was supposed to be going through a transitional period. It was the season that we went into not really knowing what Pep Guardiola's future was going to look like, whether the 1-1-5 stuff was going to come and bite Manchester City on the backside, whether that was going to have any impact, on their campaign. And so this was supposed to be our season. And it looks like right now on the 1st of December, and this can change quite dramatically very, very quickly, as we've learned in recent years. But at this point, it looks like it might be Liverpool's season. And that isn't going to go down well with the Arsenal faithful. I can tell you that. I can tell you that. Let's go into the live chat. Let's get a few of your thoughts, and then I'll react a little bit more to the game that we saw today. Damien Kelly says, why are you reacting to this game? You should be talking about Marino, Partey, and Lewis Skelly's injuries. Are you running out of content? No, we talked about those injuries on the post West Ham podcast that we recorded and released on Sunday morning. This is a bonus pod. It's an additional bit of content because I felt like, given how this game impacts us, it was worth reacting to. And I want to do more of these. We did a few at the start of the season where we kind of did like very, very short form reaction pods to major stories, to major games. And unfortunately, just the time wasn't there and I wasn't able to do as many as I would have liked. But this is something that I'd like to do as much as possible. These bonus pods where we give you a little bit more content and we can react to things through an Arsenal lens, which I think is really, really important, seen as this is an Arsenal podcast. But let's take some of your thoughts. Afsar's pretty confident that Liverpool are going to go on and win the Premier League. He says Liverpool are the champions elect and will be the champions of the 24-25 season. Super Caller's a little bit more chilled about this. He says, I'm not massively worried. We saw Liverpool against Ipswich. They just about managed to pull it back to get the win. So a slip up is definitely in them and there's a long way to go. Charlton says, good evening, Harry. I'm enjoying the fact that we are the hunters and not the hunted. Nelson says he didn't recognize Manchester City today. Afsar says that Liverpool smashed Real Madrid and Manchester City in 1 week, which is true. Sam says, in response to what I was just talking about a minute or so ago, what happens to Arteta if Slot wins the league? Well, I don't think Mikel Arteta will be, just sacked or axed if Arne Slot pips him to the Premier League title. I know there'll be a lot of fans calling for that because fans are very knee-jerk and very reactionary, but I don't for a second think that that's what the club will be thinking in the event that Arne Slot's Liverpool win the league and pip us to the title. What else have we got? Lots of comments about Liverpool's squad, the depth that they have, the ability to kind of change players in certain positions when they're dealing with injuries and problems and people dropping out of form. All of that is valid. They do have a good squad. They do have a strong squad. I've always kind of envied their attack because I think their attack is really, really potent. When you've got someone like Mo Salah who scores as many goals as he does, who's a constant threat, when you've got people like Gakpo and Nunez that are kind of interchangeable. Luis Diaz, I think, is really, really impressive as well. He's a player that I really like. They haven't even got Jota available at the moment, but, he's another option that they have in that department. They're really, really well stocked in the attacking areas, I would say, Liverpool. And they've got some pretty handy attacking midfielders as well. So, yeah, they're in a great position. They're flying high at the moment. They're looking really, really strong. And I want to give them all the praise in the world because I was one that a few weeks into the season looked at them and thought, well, some of their performances aren't quite deserving of some of the results that they've picked up. And over time, that's going to catch up with them. But they seem to have just, slowly gone about their business and they've built up momentum to the point where we're now going into December and they look like they're going to run away with this league. Now, I do believe, as I've said before, that Arsenal are going to go on a run, and I do believe that Manchester City aren't quite done just yet in terms of this season. But we'll have a wider conversation about where Manchester City are as a football club right now and the situation that they find themselves in. Some of the reactions that we're getting from Pep Guardiola at the minute, it's all a little bit touchy, sort of as if, you know, things have got under his skin a little bit. Interesting conversation to have indeed. I just want to quickly touch on a comment from Evan in the chat, because he highlights an incident that happened in the Fiorentina against Inter game. Eduardo Bove collapsed, a Fiorentina player, and this was really horrible to see. He's in intensive care apparently at the moment. He collapsed after around about 16 minutes in the game. He's currently hospitalized under pharmacological sedation and in intensive care, according to Fiorentina. This is really, really worrying news. Hopefully he's okay. You know, that you could see how distraught a lot of the players were as this horrible event unfolded and the game was rightfully abandoned. And, you know, we wish him all the best, and hopefully it's a speedy recovery for him. You never want to see stuff like that. And as I say, if you saw any of the game, you will see how emotional those on the pitch were, and you know, they clearly understood that this was a serious situation, and fingers crossed he gets through it. Horrible stuff. Back to Liverpool, who started the game just unbelievably well. Like, I looked at that kickoff and I thought, that's cheeky of Manchester City. They've turned them around. They've got them attacking the Kop end first half, which we know is not traditionally what Liverpool like to do. They normally like it to be the other way around. They normally like to attack the Kop end in the second half. And they just come out of the block so fast. Liverpool have done that for many, many years at Anfield in the biggest of games. It was one of the kind of hallmarks of Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool side for such a long time. They come out the blocks fast. The atmosphere is great. They come at you like red arrows from every single direction. Everywhere you turn, there's a red shirt swarming around you, and they play with this high energy, high intensity. And I've always said that going to Liverpool, it's one of those things where, you know, the best way to sort of to get through a game at Anfield is batten down the hatches and hope that you can survive the first 20 minutes. If you weather that storm, you'll get your moment. If you weather that storm, if you ride your luck a little bit and they're unable to find that breakthrough, then normally you see a slight releasing of the foot off the gas from Liverpool, because it's impossible to play that way for 90 minutes. And then you can start to grow into the game and you can start to do your own bits, essentially. But Liverpool love to come out fast at Anfield, and we saw that again today. And they could have been 3-4-0 up after 20 minutes. Like, they were that good. Manchester City looked hapless, all over the place. It looked like they didn't know what day it was. Their defense looked so shaky. It was unreal. And I know they got players missing, and I know they're patching things up in certain positions, but they just didn't know whether they were coming or going. And yes, Man City have been bad. They're without a win in 7 now, which is unheard of for a Pep Guardiola side. But all the credit has to go to Liverpool, because there was none of this, well, it's Manchester City, let's pay them respect. There was none of that. There was no cautiousness. There was no, you know, we're gonna make sure that we just keep it tight in the early stages. We're at home, and we're gonna bank on the fact that over the course of the 90, we're gonna create our chances. No. It was, let's go for the throats. Let's go for them. Let's go after them from the very beginning, from the very off. And it paid off, because they managed to find the breakthrough through Cody, Gakpo, Salah involved. Brilliant delivery across the box, and Gakpo was able to just turn it in. And you looked at that and you thought, you know, when you got past that kind of 20, 25 minute period, you looked at it and you started to think, I know I certainly did. I started to think, you know what? Manchester City have got away with that. They have. If they can get it together now, they're going to, at some point, surely have a spell. They're going to, at some point, have a period in the game where they look like the better side. They've got too many talented players on the pitch not to have that kind of spell. But it just never really came. You know, early in the second half, I thought they looked a little bit better. But the more I thought about it and the more I kind of watched on as the game developed, this was not Manchester City being brilliant. This was not Liverpool retreating or going into their shell. This was just the new version of Liverpool that we're watching right now with Arne Slot at the helm. There's a calmness. There's a there's a sort of relaxed nature to the way they go about things. They've got their noses in front. They're pretty relaxed and comfortable and confident in their ability to go on and score another. And you don't get that kind of frantic football at times that you got from Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool. Yes, they can turn on the burners and they can use the energy reserves when they need to, and they can just put their foot down and accelerate that little bit more and become that little bit more aggressive. But it's done in spurts. It's not done in the way that it used to be done, where it was, let's go 100 miles an hour at all times. And at times, maybe, game plans were sort of a little bit, I don't know, a bit of a blocker in Jurgen Klopp's eyes. Like, you never really saw a pragmatic Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp. This Liverpool are pragmatic, but in a different way. They're pragmatic in the sense of they just lower the energy levels a little bit. Klopp's football used to be called rock and roll football, as though it was loud because it was constant. It was in your ears. It was in your face. It would drive you insane, basically. Arne Slot's Liverpool just have the ability to turn the volume down when they want, and then turn it up again, and then turn it down. And as a result, and as a consequence, I think they manage games a lot better. I mentioned those experienced players that they have within their ranks, and that definitely helps. There's no question about that. Having players who have been there and done it, and have got the t-shirt, it helps when you need to be, as players, identifying and understanding when's the right time to go and when's the right time to just sit off, to just drop off, to just reserve energy a little bit. And so what I'm seeing is a really, really mature side that pack a punch up front that will cause you problems, but that also defensively look really sound. At no point really did I worry that Manchester City were going to cut them open. I say worry. Well, I wanted Manchester City to win the game, being completely transparent. But the point is, if I were a Liverpool fan, I wouldn't have been worrying. I wouldn't have been stressed. They gave the ball away to Kevin De Bruyne late on, but he made a pig's ear of the finish, and Kelleher was out quickly to make the save. But generally, they kept them at arm's length. And that brings me on nicely to Manchester City, who I want to wrap up this bonus pod by talking about. Where are they right now? What has happened to them? For a long time, when people were looking at this City side and saying they're not quite at it, they're not quite at the levels that we know they're capable of, the pushback was always, well, it's because of the 115 stuff. And as a knock-on effect of the 115 stuff, you've got Pep Guardiola unsure about what his future holds. And if Pep Guardiola is unsure about what his future holds and what it looks like, then that's going to rub off on the players, and the players are going to struggle. And then you add to that, the case off the pitch is still ongoing, still rumbling on. Every now and again, we get a little tidbit about what might be happening. We had another case that Manchester City went after the Premier League in, and Manchester City dressed it up as a huge victory for themselves. The Premier League did the same, so us normal folk don't have a bloody clue who actually won. But yeah, they just don't look the same. And yes, there are players missing. But then I looked through their team today, right? So I looked at their lineup. I looked at the starting 11. I thought the back four looked okay. Ortega has been a very capable deputy in goal. I don't think you'd have any concerns about him if you were a City fan. Walker, Ruben Diaz, Akanji, Ake, it's not a bad back four. Bernardo Silva and Gundogan in the midfield, not bad at all. Foden, what on earth has happened to Phil Foden this season? He's completely gone off the edge of a cliff. Mateus Nunes, it's not really worked for him at Manchester City since he's arrived there. Rico Lewis was playing in a more advanced position. That doesn't really work for me either. And Erling Haaland up front. And I looked at that and I thought, you know what? It's a decent Manchester City team, but it's not anywhere near the prime Manchester City team that we've seen. And then I looked at the bench. Gvardiol is on the bench, who has been apparently the best thing since sliced bread in terms of Premier League defenders. Jeremy Doku, who everyone was raving about this time last season. Kevin De Bruyne, okay, he might not be the fit and sharp Kevin De Bruyne we've seen in years gone by, but he's still bloody Kevin De Bruyne. Jack Grealish was on there. Savinho, who they signed. And Ederson was actually on the bench. So Pep Guardiola chose to make these changes. Pep Guardiola chose to pick that team. Was that him making a statement to some of those players that he left out to say, you've not been good enough. You don't warrant, you don't justify a place in the team right now. I know they're without Rodri, But nobody's going to be sitting here shedding a tear for Manchester City when they've got one major injury, because they've got plenty of players within their ranks. They've built up a squad over the years that a lot of people would argue. And I always say, I don't know, so don't drag me into this. But I always say, I don't know how they assembled that squad, whether they did it legitimately or not. Some people would tell you they haven't, hence the 115 charges. Others would tell you they have. The point is they have that squad and they've managed to assemble it. So nobody's going to shed a tear for them when they've got a player missing. But it just feels like there's a massive disconnect. Is the cracks starting to appear in the relationship between Pep and his players? If he's leaving some of those big stars out, some of those players, they paid £100 million for Jack Grealish and he leaves him out. They went big on Jeremy Doku. He doesn't get a look in now. Kevin De Bruyne, who's hinted that he might leave the club soon, is not getting a look in. Like, does this show that there are cracks in the relationship, as I say, between Pep Guardiola and some of his players? And Pep Guardiola is getting visibly frustrated. He scratched his face up the other day, which was madness. And then his press conferences, everything's really prickly. He bit on the sidelines as well, had a little nibble today. Something's up. And I'm surprised, actually, given all of this stuff in the background and everything that we've been talking about recently, that Pep Guardiola signed this new deal at Manchester City and that he committed to essentially 2 years. It doesn't feel right to me. There's something off with this Manchester City side. And as I said right at the top of the show, I don't want to write them off. I don't want to be that guy that says Manchester City are finished, because ultimately they've proven to us time and time again that when they do go through bad patches, they've got the quality and the mentality to come out the other side stronger for it. And there's so much evidence that suggests that and backs that up that it would be wrong, I think, to completely dismiss them. But I also understand why people look at it now and think it feels different this time. I certainly feel that way. I certainly feel like they're a lot more vulnerable right now, that not all is rosy behind the scenes, that not all is great in the dressing room. And, you know, Manchester City needed something today. I'm not saying they needed to go to Anfield and win, by the way. I'm not saying they even needed to get a point. They needed to do something, though, in terms of their performance, to just show people and maybe convince themselves that they are a side capable of competing with the very best. They turned up today like underdogs. And I can't remember the last time I watched Pep Guardiola's Manchester City side turn up somewhere as if they were the underdogs. It looked like they were defeated 5 minutes into the game before Liverpool even broke the deadlock. They just weren't at the races, and they haven't been at the races for a long old time now. And that's unusual for a group that is so talented, for a manager that will go down in history as one of, if not the greatest ever, to be really struggling to find a solution. It makes you wonder about what's going on in the background and how much of an impact that's having. Their troubles in terms of Manchester City versus the Premier League and all the rest of it, all of that's well documented. So we know that it's a thing. We know that it's an issue. But yeah, I just look at Manchester City right now and I think they are miles off it. They are miles off it. You know, they're 11 points off the top. That's a lot. It really, really is a lot. They're 2 points behind us, which isn't, of course, that significant, really. You know, we dropped a couple of points in a game, one draw, and, you know, Manchester City have closed that gap on us. Their goal difference is significantly worse, but in terms of points, they would have closed that gap. So we're not clear of them, and we still need to be looking over our shoulders. But if you're Liverpool, you feel like not only have you picked up a massive 3 points today, when the pressure was on after Arsenal, when won convincingly at West Ham, after Chelsea won convincingly against Aston Villa, you know, they went out there and they dealt Manchester City a major, major blow. And it's kind of like, do you remember back in the day when we used to watch WWE handicap matches, like Liverpool are the one, and then you've got kind of Arsenal and Manchester City. And if you want to put Chelsea in the equation as well, you can. They deserve to be in the conversation given their start to the season. Not convinced that they have what it takes to go the distance yet, but we'll see. But it's like, you know, they've thrown Manchester City out of the ring for now, and that gives them an opportunity now to go on and consolidate their position as winning the match. before Manchester City get back up and get going again. And Manchester City will get back up. And Manchester City will get going again because they're too good a side. They're too talented a group and they've got too good a manager. It's very unusual for a bad run like this to have gone on as long as it has when it comes to a Pep Guardiola side. And I'm really, really surprised. But as I say, yes, okay, the performance wasn't very good and Liverpool were by far the better team and probably should have won this game 4-5-0 in the end. I just, looking at Manchester City, it feels like the troubles run deeper this time. It feels like this is more than just a team being without their best player. And this is more than just a team that are suffering a dip in form. This is a team that are struggling, and they are struggling because something deeper is happening, in my personal opinion. And it is just my opinion. And I'm sure because of the title of this video, we're probably going to get Manchester City and Liverpool fans stumbling across this content. And so I'll summarize by saying Liverpool, brilliant, unbelievable, fantastic performance from a side that I've not always been totally convinced by at the start of this season, but with each passing week, they're taking steps, I think, to prove to those like myself who maybe doubted whether they were able to sustain this. They're proving that they're in this and they're in this thing properly, and they are someone to be taken very, very seriously in this title race. Peter Drury, I think, said something in commentary today, like they've got this title race by the neck. I mean, they're leading it and they're comfortable right now, and that's great for them, but it is the 1st of December. And I think because ourselves and Liverpool fans have both been in situations where we've been competing with Manchester City, where we've had significant leads that Manchester City have been able to claw back, I think we're both in a position where we're probably a little bit reluctant to say, yep, we've got it by the neck or by the throat, as Peter Drury put it. But they've got to be feeling pretty good about themselves right now. Why wouldn't they be? Why wouldn't they be? They're in a great position. You hope that, you know, from an Arsenal perspective, that some of the issues that they've got behind the scenes, i.e. Mo Salah's contract, Trent Alexander-Arnold's contract, Virgil van Dijk's contract, you'd hope that those things might at some point cause them a problem. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if they announce new contracts for those guys sooner, because I think Liverpool generally are a very well-run football club. But you're just looking for anything, aren't you, in terms of a potential spanner in the works for Arne Slot's side, who, as I say, have been really, really good, have been, you know, a nice hybrid between a kind of new Liverpool and the Liverpool that Jurgen Klopp left and built over all those years. As for Manchester City, it's not looking great, I've got to be honest. But anyway, we did our job this weekend. That's all that we could do. That's all that we could control. I told you that we'd be winners either way, because either both of these sides would have dropped points or one of them would. Today, it was Manchester City that dropped points. Liverpool maintained their 9-point lead at the top of the Premier League. They'll be feeling pretty good about themselves, but I tell you what, it's not over yet. Thank you so much for listening to this bonus edition of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. We'll call it Symeou Says, because it was suggested to me by Ross on Insta that we called it that. Thank you so much for the suggestion. Remember to leave a like on the video if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new, and if you're listening via the audio platforms, please do leave us a review as well, because it really, really does help. We'll be back very, very soon with another edition of the pod. Remember, if you want full reaction to the 5-2 victory at West Ham, you can find it. Last podcast on your feed, last video on the channel if you're watching us. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you want to become a patron, you can. You can visit patreon.com/The Chronicles of a Gooner, or you can search for The Chronicles of a Gooner in the Patreon app if you're already a user. Stay tuned for some discounts on the Patreon side of things and some more exciting content, which will be coming your way very, very soon. Until then, take care of yourselves. Thanks for joining me. Goodbye.